It began as an unremarkable morning at the federal courthouse, a day that, unbeknownst to its early arrivals, would soon be etched into the annals of judicial history. The corridors buzzed with the subdued energy of routine, lawyers shuffling in, clerks organizing papers, and the occasional hushed greeting among colleagues. Outside the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, the atmosphere was filled with the quiet hum of anticipation and whispered speculations about the case scheduled for the day. Yet, behind the imposing facade of marble columns and polished wood, something far more volatile was brewing. Judge Marshall Davis, a man notorious for his uncompromising severity and unpredictable temperament, had already set the tone long before the first case was called. In his private chambers, he paced slowly, the sound of his measured footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. Known for his sternness and his reputation for treating anyone who dared challenge his authority with relentless hostility, Davis was a figure both respected and feared within legal circles. As he prepared for the day, his eyes narrowed with determination and something akin to simmering rage. With a voice that brooked no argument, he barked at his young clerk, "No coffee in my courtroom." The command, sharp and unyielding, left the clerk startled, her hand trembling as she clutched a stack of documents, her face momentarily draining of color. Without missing a beat, he added, "Tell the defense team that if they're not here in 2 minutes, I'm issuing contempt charges." His tone left no room for misinterpretation, and those present instantly knew that his mood was far from accommodating. Inside the gallery, a mixture of anxiety and disbelief permeated the air. Regular observers exchanged anxious glances, their expressions a silent testament to the knowledge that today would be anything but ordinary. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a quiet undercurrent of tension as everyone braced for the inevitable confrontation that always seemed to follow when Judge Davis was presiding, especially in cases that carried political implications. It was not long before the clerk's measured voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "Vice President JD Vance has arrived for his testimony." At these words, a dark expression swept over Judge Davis's face. His eyes flickered with disdain as he remarked in a tone heavy with sarcasm, "Well, isn't that something special? Just remember, this isn't the Senate, your title means nothing in my courtroom." The statement hung in the air like a challenge, and a ripple of discomfort passed through the assembled onlookers. JD Vance, whose calm demeanor had long been his trademark, stepped forward with a measured grace. He moved with quiet dignity along the aisle, nodding politely to the court staff, his every step counterbalanced by the weight of the judge's scrutinizing gaze. Davis's impatience was soon evident as he drummed his fingers relentlessly on the bench. "Let's get one thing straight," he declared, his tone dripping with contempt and authority. "I don't care what position you hold in Washington. In this courtroom, I am the law. Is that clear, Mr. Vance?" Vance's response was calm and deliberate. "Crystal clear, Your Honor. I'm here solely as a witness to the truth," he replied, his voice steady despite the charged atmosphere. Rather than diffusing the tension, these measured words seemed only to further inflame the judge's ire. "Truth, you say? We'll see about that," Davis snapped, pivoting his focus sharply toward the defense table. The proceedings commenced with the defense attorney beginning his opening statement, attempting to set a contextual foundation for the case at hand. "This case centers on Mr. Sterling's charitable contributions and financial dealings," he explained in a measured tone, his voice echoing in the hushed room. Yet before he could elaborate further, Judge Davis interjected with barely concealed irritation. "The point is," he barked, "your client stands accused of tax evasion, end of story. I don't need a history lesson about his so-called charitable work." Every time the attorney sought to explain Sterling's community projects and charitable endeavors, the judge's interruptions grew increasingly frequent and hostile. "Irrelevant. Move on, or I will warn you again," Davis thundered, his gavel striking the bench with such force that even the court reporter struggled to keep pace with his commands. When the moment arrived for Vice President Vance to testify, the already charged atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to intensify further. "Stand up straight when you take the oath," Davis ordered sharply, his voice brooking no delay. Vance complied instantly, his posture impeccable, a silent display of the dignity he carried with him. "Speak clearly, no political doublespeak is allowed in my courtroom," the judge added sternly, his gaze unyielding. In a voice as calm as a still lake, Vance began his testimony. "I can confirm Mr. Sterling's financial transparency with regard to the Faith and Family Foundation." At these words, Davis could not help but scoff audibly. "Oh, here we go again, another conservative fairy tale about family values," he muttered under his breath, his eyes rolling dramatically as murmurs of discontent rippled through the gallery. Even members of the prosecution appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the judge's bias became starkly apparent. With his face contorted in a grimace of disdain, Davis leaned forward. "I've seen enough rich conservatives try to hide their wealth behind a veil of charitable work. Your very presence here doesn't impress me, Mr. Vance. In fact, it only deepens my doubts about your client's character." Through all the barrage of hostility, Vance maintained his composure, his calm demeanor remaining unshaken despite the personal attacks. However, it was evident to all that his steady nature only served to intensify the judge's wrath. As the proceedings advanced, subtle signs of the judge's inner turmoil became visible. His hands, once so sure and steady, began to tremble ever so slightly as he rifled through a stack of papers on his desk. Eyes darting nervously from one document to another, he tried in vain to regain control over his rapidly slipping composure. Meanwhile, Vance pressed on, his voice unwavering. "I have here documented evidence of Mr. Sterling's charitable contributions, including detailed records from the March Foundation meetings." No sooner had these words been spoken than Davis exploded with fury. "Those records are inadmissible," he bellowed, his voice rising sharply in a manner that brooked no argument. Though no formal objection was raised by the opposing counsel, the judge's vehement dismissal was unmistakably personal, a reaction driven more by deep-seated animosity than by any legitimate legal basis. It was not long before the defense attorney, emboldened by the mounting evidence, challenged the judge's sweeping dismissals. "On what grounds are you discarding this evidence, Your Honor? Do not dare question my rulings," he demanded. The judge's face flushed a deep red as he issued a stark warning, "One more word on this, and you'll be joining your client in contempt." At that moment, the tension in the courtroom escalated from a matter of legal procedure into a personal vendetta, a situation where the pursuit of justice seemed to be derailed by unchecked anger and prejudice. Determined to steer the proceedings back on course, Vance interjected in a steady, measured tone. "Your Honor, these documents were properly submitted during discovery," he stated calmly. Davis's reply dripped with sarcasm as he sneered, "Oh, so your fancy White House connections must have had something to do with that, huh? Let me tell you something, Mr. Vance, you waltz into my courtroom with your political privilege, and I will not stand for it. This is my domain, and my rules are absolute." His words reverberated ominously throughout the courtroom, leaving little doubt that he considered himself untouchable. At that point, the defense attorney found his voice again, declaring firmly, "This behavior is completely inappropriate, Your Honor." The courtroom fell into a heavy, almost suffocating silence as the judge's gavel came down with a resounding crash that echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings. "I will not be lectured about appropriateness in my own court, especially not by someone I consider a political hack," Davis snapped, his tone rising to a crescendo that sent shivers through those listening. Undeterred by the judge's tirade, Vance continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "Perhaps we should now review the specifics of the March 15 meeting," he suggested, his tone hinting at both determination and a desire for clarity. The moment those words were uttered, the judge's demeanor changed noticeably. The raw fury in his eyes gave way to a flash of uncertainty, as if he had been caught off guard by the suggestion. "Those meetings are not relevant to these proceedings," he stammered, his eyes fixed on a folder that had, inexplicably, appeared on his bench that very morning. "Interesting," Vance murmured quietly, leaning forward as if to press the point further. Considering that those meetings directly involved discussions on charitable contributions and financial transparency, isn't it peculiar that they are being dismissed so readily? Davis's reaction was swift and explosive. With both hands slamming down on the bench, he roared, "One more word about those meetings and I will have you removed from my courtroom." The command sent a collective shudder through the room, and it was clear that Davis's already precarious composure was now on the brink of collapse. The tone in the courtroom grew ever more heated. The judge's voice escalated to a manic edge as he bellowed, "I'm holding you in contempt right now. You think your position protects you? You are nothing more than a Trump lackey in an expensive suit." The viciousness of his words was matched only by the intensity of his gaze, which seemed to burn into Vance as if trying to erase any semblance of defiance. Yet, despite the outburst, Vance remained remarkably calm. He reached slowly into his briefcase and produced another document. "Your signature on these authorization forms suggests an entirely different narrative, Your Honor," he said, his tone as steady as ever, his eyes locked on the judge with unyielding resolve. In a reaction that shocked everyone present, Judge Davis lunged forward, his trembling finger pointing directly at Vance. "You planted these files. This is nothing short of a setup, a conservative conspiracy designed to undermine my authority," he accused, his voice cracking as if betraying a hidden fear. For a moment, the courtroom was silent, the air thick with disbelief. Vance, however, pressed on softly but firmly. "Interesting choice of words, Your Honor," he remarked, "especially when one considers your own secretive meetings with activist groups and the sudden appearance of these documents on your bench. I am not here to be interrogated in my own courtroom." At that point, the atmosphere reached a fever pitch. The tension was palpable, and every observer in the room could feel that the stakes had escalated far beyond mere legal technicalities. Judge Davis's outbursts grew louder, more erratic. "You think you can come in here with your smug face and your so-called evidence? Shut up," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. Vance, steadfast as ever, countered in a measured tone, "That evidence, Your Honor, points to a disturbing pattern. One that mirrors the Thompson case from last month, where a small business owner was crushed under the weight of suppressed evidence regarding his charitable work." At these words, Davis's reaction was almost hysterical. The Thompson case. Conservative fraud always gets what it deserves. These people hide behind family values and believe themselves untouchable, he sneered, his voice rising in a crescendo of anger. Not willing to relent, Vance slid yet another document across the table. "Perhaps we should also revisit the Wilson hearing," he proposed, "where, just hours after a meeting with representatives from the Liberty Foundation, you inexplicably sealed all records." For an instant, the judge's face contorted into an expression that was part fury, part uncertainty. "How do you know about that?" he sputtered, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected line of questioning that threatened to expose yet another inconsistency in his handling of the case. "Your Honor," Vance continued steadily, "what about the $100,000 that appeared in your offshore account the very next day? The same Mr. Peterson, who hosted that exclusive yacht meeting last month, attended by 7 other judges who subsequently ruled in favor of his interests, how do you account for that?" At this, Judge Davis exploded in a flurry of indignation. "You have no right. Those records are privileged, and those conversations were strictly private," he roared, his voice trembling with barely concealed panic. Vance leaned forward even further, his tone unwavering and calm. "But they were obtained legally, Your Honor. Your own security cameras captured the midnight shredding of documents, and your phone records clearly show the threats you made. Your signature on the authorization forms corroborates every transfer. How do you explain these discrepancies?" Desperation began to seep into Davis's voice as he reached across his desk in a final, desperate bid to regain control. "Give me those files, I order you to turn them over immediately," he demanded, his voice echoing powerfully in the chamber. Before anyone could react, a deep, authoritative voice resonated from the back of the courtroom. Every head turned as a team of FBI agents advanced steadily down the center aisle, their presence casting a long shadow over the proceedings. "This courtroom is now under federal investigation," announced the lead agent, his badge gleaming in the harsh lights as he approached. "Judge Marshall Davis, please remain exactly where you are." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Davis, once so certain of his unchallenged authority, now backed away from his bench, his voice cracking as he protested, "I have immunity. I have connections. Do you know who I am?" The agent's response was cool, measured, and delivered without a trace of emotion. "We know exactly who you are, Your Honor. Especially in light of your recent meetings with the Liberty Foundation, your offshore accounts, and your coordinated targeting of conservative defendants." Desperation flickered in Davis's eyes as he looked wildly around the room, muttering, "This is all a setup, a conservative plot." In a calm yet resolute tone, Vance interjected once more. "No, Judge Davis. The only plot here is your systematic abuse of power. Every biased ruling, every backdoor deal, every attempt to silence the truth, it all ends today." His voice rang out clearly across the now hushed courtroom, a beacon of unwavering resolve amid the chaos. As the FBI agents moved in to restrain the judge, his outbursts grew even wilder. "You think you can come in here with your evidence and change everything? I am the law, no one has the right to arrest me," he screamed in a frenzied burst as he attempted to lunge toward his chambers. But the agents were unyielding, and soon he was led away in handcuffs. Even as he was dragged out, he managed to hurl one final, bitter accusation at Vance. "You think this changes anything? There will always be others like me, you can't stop us all." Vance's reply was measured and firm. "There will always be those who abuse power," he said softly, "but there will also always be those brave enough to stand up and fight against it. That is what keeps our justice system functioning, not the corruption you represent, but the courage to defend the truth." His words resonated deeply in the stunned silence that followed. In the days and weeks that followed, the arrest of Judge Davis sent shockwaves throughout the legal community. His downfall triggered an avalanche of investigations across multiple jurisdictions, exposing an entire network of corruption that had long operated beneath the veneer of respectability. What had begun as the unruly behavior of one notoriously biased judge soon revealed itself to be merely the tip of a vast iceberg of systemic abuse, a deliberate effort to target conservative figures and conceal inconvenient truths through manipulation and coercion. Evidence mounted steadily as witnesses came forward, and the once impenetrable walls of judicial misconduct began to crumble under the relentless pursuit of justice. Perhaps the most symbolic moment came when Mr. Sterling's case was ultimately dismissed. A newly assigned judge, tasked with reviewing the evidence that Davis had so desperately tried to hide, determined that there was no legal basis for the charges. This dramatic vindication underscored one immutable truth: justice is not dictated by those who wield power with arrogance and prejudice, but by those who dare to stand up for the truth even in the face of overwhelming odds. This tumultuous day in the courtroom was not solely about one man's misconduct, it was a powerful reminder that when individuals of integrity, like JD Vance and others willing to risk their reputations, stand up against abuse of power, they can expose even the most deeply entrenched corruption. The ripple effects of that fateful day extended far beyond the courtroom walls, inspiring further reforms aimed at restoring accountability and fairness within a system that had long been marred by secrecy and favoritism. As the story spread, communities began to see it not as an isolated incident, but as a clarion call to all citizens. It was a call to demand transparency from those who govern, and to insist that no one, regardless of position or influence, should be allowed to abuse the power entrusted to them. It reminded every onlooker that justice is not merely a function of legal procedures but a living, breathing principle that must be protected by the collective courage of those who believe in truth. In retrospect, the events of that day stand as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of justice. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of corruption and abuse, the system, flawed as it may be, can be set right when those with the fortitude to challenge injustice come forward. This saga was not simply a courtroom drama, it was a microcosm of the ongoing struggle for integrity and accountability in every corner of public life. For those who believe in the power of truth and accountability, this narrative is more than just a story, it is an inspiration to continue the fight against corruption wherever it may rear its head. It is a reminder that while some may attempt to hide behind the guise of power and privilege, the light of justice ultimately has a way of exposing the truth. The legacy of that day is a promise that no matter how deep the corruption, it can be unmasked and defeated by the collective will of the people. As you reflect on this extended account of that dramatic day in the courtroom, consider the many lessons it imparts. It teaches us that courage in the face of tyranny, persistence in the pursuit of truth, and an unwavering commitment to justice are the very foundations upon which a fair society is built. Every act of defiance against the misuse of power, no matter how small, contributes to the larger movement for accountability and reform. Now, as this narrative comes to a close, the echoes of that historic day continue to resonate. The courage of those who stood against injustice, the determination of those who fought for transparency, and the eventual triumph of truth over corruption serve as a beacon of hope for all who believe in a just and equitable society. Let this story be a call to action, a reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over, and that every individual has a role to play in safeguarding the integrity of our institutions. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you are watching from. If you believe in standing up for what is right and fighting against corruption, join the conversation. Every voice counts in the struggle for a fair and just society, and your support can help inspire others to take a stand. Thank you for reading this detailed account of that unforgettable day. May we always have the courage to confront injustice, the determination to demand accountability, and the unwavering belief that, in the end, the truth will prevail. Justice is not merely a concept enshrined in law, it is a daily commitment to ensuring that every citizen is treated with fairness and dignity, and that no one is allowed to abuse the power entrusted to them. In the end, this story is about much more than a single courtroom battle. It is about the enduring strength of our collective conscience, the resilience of a system that, despite its flaws, can be corrected when those who believe in justice are willing to stand up and speak out. As the pages of history continue to turn, let us remember that even the most powerful can be held accountable, and that every act of defiance against corruption is a step toward a brighter, more transparent future. Today, as you finish reading these words, know that the fight for justice is ongoing. There will always be challenges, there will always be those who attempt to hide behind power, but there will also always be brave souls ready to expose the truth. And it is through their courage that our society moves ever closer to the promise of equality, fairness, and true accountability. This is our shared story, a story of hope, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of what is right. Stand tall, speak out, and never let the flame of justice be extinguished. For as long as there are those willing to fight for truth, no force, however corrupt or powerful, can ever permanently silence the voices of the righteous.